Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Focus on Finance show. I'm your host, Shafiq Morton. As always, it's great to be with you. This year has started with a global economic slowdown predicted last year, with the major central banks being conservative in their outlook. However, there's been a little bit of sun with US-China trade relations, and again, a bit of a cloud with Brexit, and of course, geopolitical problems. On the local side in South Africa, the beginning of the year started off with the Eskom crisis, and that, of course, filtered into the mining and manufacturing sectors. We also have a fragile consumer confidence, mainly due to rising prices of fuel and electricity. Again, a little bit of sunlight. On May the 8th, the country goes to elections. And of course, the big question, will we see version 2 of Ramaphoria after May? But just to discuss all of this with us in today's program is Oasis Group CEO, Mr. Ebrahim. Adam, assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the show.
Wa alaikum salam, Shafiq.
Let's have a look. We are on the cusp of the 2019 elections. Number one, how do you see it going? And of course, I think the big question, which we'll allude to a lot, I'm sure, Ramaphoria version 2.
When you look at the election, what's most disappointing is the list of the ANC. We have some people on the list that's kind of, I wouldn't want to be in the same room.
Compromised.
Yes, and their names crop up in corruption probes. And so that's really a big issue. The second big issue is that the vibrancy of democracy, and let's ignore our political views for the moment, a party must be able to lose. Okay? And unfortunately, what has happened, because then you get parties taking the citizens of the country seriously, and then you start getting delivery. Mm-hmm. And we've had 8-9 years of very poor performance. And let's ignore our president, because I think our president's doing a great job. A party that can put a list that has so many people tainted with corruption, with the high probability that they're going to win, most probably with 60+% of the vote. That's not great, because that means there's no accountability. And so we have to look at the opposition parties and say, hey guys, you were given an opportunity to be highly competitive and you haven't taken advantage of it. So let's bank that for the moment. The issue around South Africa at the moment is, besides we have a new president, but we still have policies that have been in place since 1994. And some of those policies are focused on redistribution rather than growth. Those policies need to be addressed. Secondly, we have the best president that we can have at the moment, in my opinion. The second point is we're still too soft on corruption. And let's talk about Steinhoff. We have this, takes 2 years to produce a report. And the report is released. And the author, the partner of the accounting firm who wrote the report, is then hired by Steinhoff to be the chief compliance officer. Now, that should never be allowed. Firstly, if he ever has to be called up as a witness to hold the many people who have destroyed so much wealth in South Africa, he's compromised. Mm-hmm. He's not able to do it. And there's a massive conflict of interest, because he will share all the knowledge that he gained in this review to the company, and maybe to the benefit of those people who should be prosecuted and should be in jail. So we do not have a culture of accountability. However, the president has started the process of holding people accountable. Now he's got a relatively weak hand, but a strong election for him may give him and the people around him give him the ability to deal with those people that are corrupt. So that's what we're hoping for. Mm-hmm. And then why I don't believe in Ramaphoria 1 or 2. It's a long road. Mm-hmm. And those of us who've been here before in the early 90s, mid-90s, when you move from a bankrupt, corrupt apartheid state to a new liberated democracy, we had to take some very serious decisions, tough decisions, and you first feel the pain of those decisions before you feel the benefit. So a lot of the action that needs to be taken are structural, so it will take time. And the biggest structural issue that impediment today is Eskom.
Now, looking at this whole landscape, of course, something else that also factors into everybody's minds is hike in interest rates. I think last year there was a bit of a hike. How do you see the year going forward in terms of monetary policy? Because surely that's going to have a major psychological effect apart from anything else.
So firstly, I ended my, answering the first question by the word Eskom. I'm going to start again by answering. We are a country held captive by the incompetence and bankruptcy of Eskom. And so this economy, a year ago, I thought, I was very positive as we ended 2018, mm-hmm. and after the election of our president as leader of the ANC, etc., I was very positive and thought that we would get to 2.5% growth in the short term, and in the medium term 3 to 4, and then potentially in the long term 5%. However, because of Eskom, this economy cannot grow by more than 1 to 1.5%. So we really need to fix Eskom. And that is the biggest and most important priority this country has.
Just a quick question to jump in. Do you think Eskom can be fixed? I think this is a question every South African is asking.
Not with the current management, not with the current structure. The current management are much better than the previous lot. Who just, let's not say anything. They've turned a wonderful institution into an institution that's effectively technically bankrupt, and that is hollowed out with no technical skills, no competitive advantage. So we have to fix Eskom, but we have to change Eskom, and that's what we're talking about. And I see over the weekend the new officer is about to be appointed, the reorganization officer. So what you need is competition on the on the generation, and we have started that process, but at the moment it all has to go back to Eskom. What we need is competition, numerous companies generating power, including renewable power and including other clean forms of power. And then secondly, you then need a distribution company to get the electricity, and then the companies, and then companies that actually take it to the consumer. So you need competition, you need the private sector, you need good governance. Once we have that, then to some extent we have the framework for growth. So you asked me a question about interest rates. South African interest rates are currently about 2% to 3% higher than where they should be. We an economy where there's no demand side strength. So the economy actually needs this 200 basis point cut in interest rates.
Do you think it's going to happen?
No, but we won't have an increase in interest rates. And then secondly, the global reserve banks have moved from very tight monetary policy, especially the US, to looser monetary policy. So I don't see us cutting interest rates in the short term, but until Eskom, because we cannot afford to grow. So the interest rates are actually keeping the economy growing at a very mediocre pace to protect Eskom. Otherwise, what would happen is if we lower interest rates to 2%, we won't have lights from then onwards. So it's a tricky situation, but the economy needs Eskom to be fixed. It needs 200 to 300 basis point to 3% reduction in interest rates. And we need a president who has the right policies, holds people accountable, and then we're back to 3 to 5% economic growth.
Okay, if we look at growth predictions down for the beginning of the year, what about the end of the year? Will there be a pickup?
So when you're so low, there will be a pickup. But again, the proviso is, how bad is Eskom? Now, people basically, the old guard messed the place up. The new guard running Eskom don't want to tell the truth on how bad things are. And secondly, because it's structurally really bad. And secondly, they may not have the competency to fix it. And so we keep getting misinformation. And until we get the real truth, the total truth, we can then solve the problem. Which may mean, and they are talking about bringing international skills. There is a flood of international skills available in Europe in particular, in coal-powered power stations, because many countries in Europe, like Germany, are basically winding down the coal-powered industry, and secondly, the nuclear-powered industry. So there's a flood of skills that are available at the senior management level, at the technical level. We should be scooping those up, putting the right governance, contracts in place, and oversight in place, and we should be able to fix Eskom within an 18-month period. However, that won't happen. It will partially happen, and it will take 5 to 7 years to fix Eskom.
Adam, let's have a look at inflation now. It seems to be lower than expected, but we've got a sort of a paradox here. Lower than expected inflation, but rising costs. How do we get our heads around that? And how does that impact on growth?
Okay, so inflation globally is low, and the global inflation trends will be lower, and that's impacting South Africa. So less to do with the good things that's happening in our country, more to do with two things: the change in inflation to very low globally, and the lack of economic growth in South Africa. So when there's very little demand, there's excess supply in the system, and so there's no need to push up prices. What you're talking about is a couple of things. Let's harp on this guy called Eskom, right? Not only do we pay a lot of money for Eskom electricity, but because it's no longer dependable, we now go buy lamps. So when the lights are out, we have lamps so we can read and see at night. And then we see that that's not good enough because it affects our quality of life. So now you're paying Eskom, and you're buying lamps, and then you go buy a generator or an inverter or solar system. And by the way, then the municipality comes to you and says, you've done all of that, but we're going to charge you. We can't give you electricity, but we're going to charge you for an availability charge for electricity, which they haven't been able to give you. Mm-hmm. So there's more and more and more things that you're spending on, and you're paying for twice. So value for money, government's not delivering, and the SOEs are not delivering. So we are used to a high quality and standard of living, so we go and incur that expense twice. We've done it, we do it with electricity, we're doing it with water. Everybody's putting a borehole in to provide alternative water sources. We've did it with schools, public schools to private schools. We did it with security, state security. Now we all put in the security doors, and we have security guards. These are all additional expenses. So invariably what's happening, you're paying twice, and you're not getting twice the amount of product. You're actually getting one full amount and getting little for that. And increasingly that is reducing. And that's why you're seeing this rise in the amount of disturbances, grassroots disturbances. People are not getting service delivery. Mm-hmm. Corruption has destroyed the ability of municipalities to deliver. It has destroyed the ability of provinces and national government to deliver, but importantly, it's destroyed the ability of the state-owned enterprises. Now, it looks all kind of gloomy, but out of that, we will start becoming less dependent on government and states. And so they'll charge you an availability charge, but it's much smaller. Mm-hmm. And then over time, you will use less Eskom, you'll use less water from, and you'll be self-sufficient. And there'll be alternative people that can provide it cheaper. And once that, the pendulum swings where we become less dependent on the inefficient, we become more self-reliant, and we become more reliant on the efficient. That is the basis of us swinging from very low economic growth to faster economic growth, and we start moving back to where we say the inflation number is 5, the cost of living is 5, because you're getting what you're paying for.
Now, as we move on in this environment, all of us crossing fingers that there's no more load shedding from Eskom. But you mentioned earlier in the interview that what happens internationally does impact us, and the two big things I think are US-China trade talks, trade wars, whatever you want to call it, and of course the cloud of Brexit, the craziness of Brexit. How do you see that impacting on our local landscape, and how is that going to impact on growth in the medium to long term?
Again, because we've been worried about Eskom, and because our government agencies have been depleted, we're not in a very strong position to renegotiate trade deals. And secondly, we're not in a very strong position to police our borders. So whatever happens between the US and China, for one, we may actually lose, because the Chinese will find a new market for their product. Mm-hmm. And so we may not have great trade policies and agreements with China, so things will flood in. Secondly, our borders are very porous, so things will seep in illegally. So we're at risk of losing a huge amount of jobs unless we start focusing more actively on this. There's something like Brexit. We have relationships and trade deals with the EU. Now, depending on how Brexit impacts those relationships between South Africa and the EU breaks down, because it only applies to the EU, doesn't apply to the UK. And if you're part of global supply chain, producing a BMW for export into Europe and the UK, what does that mean? That there's tariffs on the product that goes into the UK if it has got EU components. So it's pretty complex. I don't see the country and I don't see the leadership dealing with these things like trade and dealing with things like the fourth industrial revolution. We're dealing with Eskom and corruption, and we're getting diverted by those things rather than dealing with the long-term real issues, how we remain competitive as a country, how we remain a place where businesses can be globally vibrant and competitive. Now, despite all of that, the Almighty has given us some huge competitive advantages. Natural resources, where the abundance of high-quality natural resources means that our products are less pollutive than other products in manganese and iron ore. So there's a demand for our products. So the Almighty has given us many competitive advantages. So as a country, while the people may be messing up, there's natural endowments that we have. With the right leadership and the right energy, we can be a globally competitive economy, and we can have globally competitive companies. So we're in that transition at the moment. There's a lot of gloom and doom. Eskom's affecting us, but Eskom will be fixed. Whether it's 1 year or 6 years, that's the story. I hope it's 1 year or 18 months or 2 years. And, we just got to have energy, and we've got to ask the Almighty to guide us.
I mean, to that, just sort of a wild card to throw into the pot. Government has also been talking very confidently about the fourth industrial revolution. Whether they understand what it is another program. How do you see this playing into South Africa, where we have an economy that is sometimes developing and that is sometimes development? In other words, it's quite mixed. How does the fourth industrial revolution play into all of this and into growth?
So again, we almost have two scenarios. The scenario where the Almighty has given us an endowment, that area is protected. Okay, so the natural resources, the increased use of certain types of natural resources for green and clean energy and green and clean products and stronger products, I think those things will do really well. Then other things that deals with human capital will do very poorly. So when you talk about the fourth industrial revolution, and around about 2021, 2022, in the US, Europe, Japan, and Korea, and China, you'll see very dramatic changes in the impact of the fourth industrial revolution. So, what you're talking about, just like the service industry, like our industry, the banks of back office people, all of that could be automated. And South Africa has a competitive advantage in that supply of back office people. Secondly, if you think about autonomous vehicles, we wouldn't need taxi drivers. Okay, what are all those people going to do? Do they have skills? Can they be retrained? Or are they going to be like the miners who work in Klerksdorp and all of these towns who have nothing else? And so South Africa, in a strange way, is very well protected. And at the same time, it's exposed to the worst effects, negative effects of the fourth industrial revolution.
And some final thoughts as we approach not only national elections, but the month of Ramadan.
It's a great month. We don't travel, we enjoy time with family, and it allows us to focus on the important things. And it also allows us to renew. The most important thing, one of the many important things about being a Muslim is being positive, being optimistic, because you must put your faith in the Almighty. So while we've spoken about lots of difficult things and corruption, etc., if we're optimistic, if we put our faith in the Almighty and we strive to please Him in every way we can, inshallah, the road ahead is bright, and as bright as any country, and we will deal with corruption, we will deal with Eskom, we will deal with high interest rates, and we will deal with the fourth industrial revolution, because the Almighty will show us the way.
Ameen to that. Adam Ebrahim, have a good Ramadan, and thanks for chatting to us.
Thank you, Shafiq, and same to you and your family. Have a wonderful Ramadan.
Shukran. And that concludes today's edition of the Oasis Focus and Finance Show. A special thanks to our guest, Mr. Adam Ebrahim, CEO of the Oasis Group. Should you wish to watch this or any of our other shows, you can log into the Oasis Crescent YouTube channel or catch us on LinkedIn. Should you wish to call us, 0860 100 786 or email info@oasiscrescent.com. Until next time, I'm your host, Shafiq Morton. Do have a beautiful Ramadan, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.